Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on the topic of quality risk management. I'm Stephen Mahoney from Gilead Sciences, and I currently am the Pharma Topic Lead for ICH Q9R1. So on behalf of Pharma, I wanted to thank the FDA and Health Canada for the opportunity to present on this important topic of quality risk management. Here's a short disclaimer, understanding that nearly all the information contained in this presentation has been adopted or slightly modified from several publicly available ICH presentations. I also provided a link to this information at the end of this presentation. Moving on, here's an overview of the information I'll be addressing over approximately the next 15 minutes. I will start by describing the general purpose for the revised ICH Q9 guideline, and then highlight a few of the ICH process milestones for this Q9 revision. And finally, I'll delve into the real content of this deck, meaning a discussion of the revision topics themselves. So let's begin with the initial question. What was the purpose of the revision? Well, I think it's important to understand that the revision was intentionally designed to be a very targeted revision of the original Q9 guidance document, and therefore it only addresses specific areas for improvement. One of the areas is the concept of subjectivity, as there was a feeling that high levels of subjectivity in risk assessments and in QRM outputs have been seen in the industry and across the industry, and something that needs improvement. The second concept, of course, is product availability. It's something that's been in the news for many years, and it's something that obviously is a great concern to industry and to our patients. The topic of formality. Similar to subjectivity, I believe there's a lack of understanding as to what constitutes formality in QRM work. Similarly, for risk-based decision-making, it's a question of what is this and how is it used in the context of QRM. In addition to the development of new content for the above topics, there's one specific terminology changed in the original Q9 document. This is the term risk identification, which is modified to become hazard identification, which is more consistent with the original definitions. And for the sixth topic, risk review, there were concerns about a lack of clarity on the concept itself. As you'll see here, this is an important note. New guidance or training has been developed for each of these areas. The first 5 topics were addressed with new guidance in the ICH Q9 document itself and by developing training materials that support the new guidance. In the 6th topic, risk review, while it did not have any new guidance written for it in the guideline, new training material was developed for this topic. But before we go into the specific areas, let's take a step back and look how we got to where we are today. Given our limited time, I won't go into too many details for these milestones, but I do think it's important to understand that the overall time frame for this targeted revision took several years of hard work and dedication by many individuals from many different organizations around the world. I also want to quickly note that I provided a link here to the ICH concept paper and the business plan, as well as a final guidance document for May of 2023. And then in terms of process, I also wanted to note that the EWG reviewed and adjudicated over 750 comments received during the public consultation period, which started in 2021. As you can imagine, this was a very time-consuming process, but in the end, the expert working group was able to reach consensus on all the final changes. And as you can see here on the bottom, the IWG now is currently working on supportive training material with an eye to complete this work in 2024. So here are the revision topics we identified earlier. Let's go one by one with some details and descriptions. So topic 1, subjectivity. Probably the first question I assume in everyone's mind is, what is subjectivity? Well, as I was preparing for this presentation, I looked at several dictionary definitions. I remember doing this a few years ago when the EWG began, and I found a few different ideas that I thought essentially captured what we were thinking about. But essentially, subjectivity is something that's based on an individual's perceptions, feelings, or intentions. So here's a picture from one of the past EWG presentations. When I see this, I see a few things. One person's looking at the object on the left as a tree. Another person saw this same thing as something that produces an apple. And the person on the right saw this as something that can generate money. So I think you get the idea. It's fairly easy for three people to look at the same thing and leave with three very different perceptions. Given this, let's move to a little more detail on the topic of subjectivity in terms of Q9. I think we can all agree that high levels of subjectivity in risk assessments in QRM are problematic. And why is this? I think it's pretty obvious. Subjectivity may directly impact the effectiveness of the risk management activities and the decisions made. Well, again, I don't think this idea is particularly novel to anyone listening to this presentation today. So I think the more important question really is, what causes subjectivity? Again, of course, this isn't a simple answer, and there's many, many factors. The ICH Q9 guideline addresses and discusses several of these, including differences in how hazards, risks, and harms are perceived by different stakeholders. This, of course, captures the ideas of biases. Another issue we've discussed extensively with the expert working group is inadequately defined risk questions, which really starts the process off in the wrong direction. And three, another example is the risk scoring methods that some risk assessments use. Of course, given all these different risk tools and all these different causes of subjectivity, is it really possible to eliminate subjectivity? Well, again, I think everyone knows the answer is no. However, while subjectivity can't be eliminated from QRM activities, it may be controlled using well-recognized strategies, including addressing biases I mentioned earlier and other behavioral factors. I believe the specific language used in the Q9 guidance is that subjectivity should be, quote, managed and minimized. It's an important concept. Before continuing, I want to highlight the importance of the information in this yellow box. Given the nature of the targeted changes I spoke about, and the somewhat use of vague terms like subjectivity, I think it's really important to read the revised guideline and the ICH new training materials together. The training materials were developed essentially in parallel or soon after the revisions were made, and they really add a lot of substance to a lot of terms that within the guideline, again, are fairly vague. So the second topic we addressed in the revised ICH Q9 guideline involves product availability, otherwise known as drug shortages to many of us. But before I go into too much detail, I wanted to flag for everyone that the original guideline already addressed product availability risks through its definition of harm. The definition of harm was, quote, included damage from a loss of product quality or availability. So the idea and the concept is already there. Why did the concept paper and the business plan seek to increase the emphasis? Well, although we recognize ICH Q9 is not a supply chain guideline, it was agreed to develop and expand on this topic for several reasons, the largest of which is probably the idea of globalization. Therefore, addressing product availability risks more clearly and with more focus was important to the group, given the extent of globalization of medicine supply chains, the associated complexities, and the different types of fragmentation involved with this. Again, if you look in the yellow box, this increased focus on this topic is really patient-focused, meaning a better understanding of how to develop appropriate risk-based drug shortage mitigation and preventions will serve the interests of our patients. So turning to the guideline itself, the revised guideline addresses several things. It says that quality manufacturing issues, including noncompliance with GMP, are a significant cause of product availability. Again, I don't think this is really in question, but I think everyone probably knows it's well addressed in literature over the last 10 to 15 years, including something I worked on with ISPE in their drug shortage survey, which was cited back in 2013 in FDA's strategic plan for preventing and mitigating drug shortages. This is just one of many efforts and works that have been done by different trade associations. But again, it's been a long-term effort, and it's something that we're hoping to improve with this language. In B, the revised guideline also describes how an effective pharmaceutical quality system drives both supply chain robustness and sustainable compliance. In particular, there's specific language in the guideline that describes how an effective PQS uses quality risk management, and quote, to provide an early warning system that supports effective oversight and response to evolving quality manufacturing risks from the pharmaceutical company or external partners. This concept of an early warning system was something, again, that was discussed in great detail by members of the expert working group, and consequently, you'll find that idea captured in the guideline itself as well as the training. And then for C, in terms of formality, the guidance describes that when risk-based shortage prevention and mitigation activities are performed, the level of formality may vary and should be commensurate with the level of risk associated with the loss of availability of the products. Again, quite vague, but also I think it's important to realize there's flexibility here in terms of the level of formality. And then in D, the revised guideline also addresses several specific quality manufacturing factors that may affect product availability. And the guideline goes into a great deal of detail here. On 1, manufacturing process variability and state of control. 2, manufacturing facilities and equipment, including, I believe, a case study involving older facilities and older equipment. And then 3, the oversight of outsourced activities and suppliers. And before I turn to the next topic, I want to reiterate what I said on the first one, meaning it's very important to read the guideline and the training material together. For this topic of product availability, the EWG created a great deal of content for the training, based in part on expert material provided by several external stakeholders. Topic number 3 was formality. The original guideline said, quote, the level of effort, formality, and documentation of the quality risk management process should be commensurate with the level of risk. Again, I think this sounds great and no one can argue with it, but it begs the question, well, what does formality in QRM actually mean? I think it's safe to say that, and given the discussions for the original concept paper and business plan, this concept has led, with the lack of understanding of this concept, has led to a great deal of confusion and uncertainty, both in industry and among regulators. Consequently, the revised version of Q9, 1, seeks to clarify what formality in QRM means. It discusses degrees of formality and the factors that might be considered when determining how much formality to apply to a given QRM activity. As part of this discussion on degrees of formality, it's important to realize that formality in quality risk management is not a binary concept, meaning formal and informal. Given this, varying degrees of formality may be applied during quality risk management activities. So overall, it's fair to say that formality can be considered a continuum or a spectrum from high to low. So when I think of degrees of formality, I immediately think of continuum. Point 3, related to this continuum concept, the third point highlights the revised guidance discusses the characteristics of higher and lower levels of formality. Again, I believe there's a quarter to a half a page on the specific concept within the guideline. And of course, there's additional training material on this as well. And then 4, not surprisingly, the 4th point emphasizes there's flexibility in how much formality may be applied in relation to QRM activities. And I think this is probably expected given the fact that there's distinction between higher to lower, given the nature of the continuum, given the nature of the varying degrees. Flexibility is something that's going to be understood, again, hopefully well developed by the industry and regulatory bodies. But let's take a step back. What is the real benefit of understanding formality in the QRM context? Well, EWG thought about this, and they came up with a few ideas. We felt that additional clarity on formality may help ensure that the extent of scientific and methodological rigor applied during QRM is commensurate with the level of risk. In addition, and this came up a great deal in discussions, was that understanding formality might also lead to a resource savings for QRM and the use of these resources more efficiently. For example, where lower risk issues are dealt with more efficiently via less formal means, the resources from that would be freed up for managing higher risk issues and more complex problems. That's kind of a complicated sentence, but I think it's an understanding that, again, if you understand and apply the right level of formality, the concept is you'll be able to shift resources when higher risk issues arise. And again, before we leave this topic of formality, I want to reiterate the value of reading the ICH guideline in connection with the training material. As you can see over the last few minutes, it's pretty difficult to explain formality, let alone the details of a continuum involving formality, in just a few minutes. So as I mentioned before, there are specific training decks for each of these 4 topics today. Topic 4, risk-based decision-making. While ICH refers to decision-making, there's a lack of clarity in the original version of Q9 in terms of what good risk-based decision-making is, how it might be achieved, and how QRM may improve decision-making generally. I think we can all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic illustrated the importance of effective risk-based decision-making, both by regulatory agencies and the industry. And so given this, the revisions in ICH Q9 and associated training seek 1, of course, to provide clarity, and 2, to address the expected benefits of investing in risk-based decision-making activities. So let's start with the question, where does risk-based decision-making occur? Well, ICH, the revised guideline says that risk-based decision-making is inherent in all quality risk management activities. It provides an essential foundation for decision makers in an organization. The guideline also indicates that the decisions made from quality risk management activities include those in relation to 1, what hazards exist, 2, the risks associated with those hazards, 3, the risk controls required, 4, the acceptability of the residual risk after risk controls, and the communication and review of quality risk management and activities and outputs. Bottom line, effective risk-based decision-making begins when determining the level of effort, formality, and documentation that should be applied during the quality risk management process. For topic 5 is hazard identification. This may seem like a fairly minor, but we believed it was an important change in the guideline. And the term risk identification has been changed in the revised guideline to hazard identification. This was done to better reflect the guidance in the original ICH Q9 document. The figure in ICH Q9 on the left depicting the QRM process was also changed to replace risk identification with hazard identification. And as you can see in the blue box, the change aligns with the expectation to identify hazards relevant to patients when evaluating risks, and it may improve how hazards are perceived and assessed. In topic 6, risk review. The ICH revision work continues to provide additional clarity on the expectations relating to keeping risk assessments current and the implementation of risk reviews. 2 points for this. It's important for this concept to take lifestyle manufacturing performance and quality feedback into account. And 2, risk review ties in the concepts of continuous improvement as expressed in ICHQ 10, as well as other lifecycle management guidelines. As mentioned before, and as seen in the yellow box, this area was addressed by developing training materials on this topic only. So in summary, I hope you found the last few minutes helpful to learn a little bit more about ICHQ 9. Again, we talked about the purpose, we talked about some milestones and timelines, and we discussed the specific topics. But again, I would be remiss without, as a final reminder, saying, 1, please don't just read the guidelines. Read both the guidelines and the new ICH training material. I'm not sure that reading just the guideline would be classified a hazard in Q9 terms, but I'm confident that all members of the EWG and the IWG would strongly recommend reading both the guideline and the training materials. I look forward to answering any questions you may have for this presentation. Thank you for your time.